Hey, hello. I think we should be live now. Hopefully we are. I think we're looking good. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's well. I can see little numbers changing with people jumping in. Um, awesome. Well, welcome to the Balvenie Live episode 1. So we're doing a live distillery tour today. My name is Blainey and the Balvenie brand ambassador for you guys in Australia and New Zealand. And this is really cool. So glad to have so many bartenders from all around Australia. We are streaming through Australian Bartender Magazine, who's so supportive of the industry, and we're just really happy to be able to show you. Well, some of us might be stuck at home. We're all definitely stuck inside Australia, but at least for an hour or so, we can pretend we're at the distillery. I don't know, you can sit really close to your screen and just shut everything else off and just pretend you're at the distillery for a while. So before we get started, I'd like you all to pour yourself a whiskey. We're going to see a little bit of the sights and sounds around Dufftown, around the distillery, just to get in the mood. And then I'll introduce a couple of guests that are going to be joining us for tonight. But before we get going, just sit back, relax, pour yourself a dram, and we'll start off with the sights and sounds of Dufftown. Wow. Every time I watch that, literally every time, I'm just in a trance at the end of it. I'm not even paying attention. I should be paying attention when I'm doing this. There's a little bit of an intro to the Balvenie Distillery. It's such a beautiful place. It's actually quite emotional watching it. I haven't been there in so long. I know how beautiful it is. Before we go any further, I think we should introduce our other two guests. One who's going to be walking us around the distillery and one who's at home at the moment, but going to be joining in the conversation. So I'll start off by introducing our apprentice maltmaster, Kelsey McKechnie, who's going to be joining us here. There you are. Hi, Kelsey. How you doing?
Hi, Ross. I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm not bad, thanks. Not bad at all. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, or this morning, I suppose it is for you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So for everyone watching at home, Kelsey's our apprentice maltmaster at Balvenie. How long have you been with the company now, Kelsey?
Since 2014, and specifically with Balvenie since 2018. So it's a hot minute in whiskey terms.
Yeah, so is it 3 years now that you've been officially the apprentice maltmaster to David? Is that right? 3 years?
It has been. I know, because it's been such a funny year for everyone, it doesn't feel like it's been an extra year, but yeah, flying in.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it seems like yesterday that just happened, but yeah, it's incredible. 3 years, awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for joining us. I suppose we're just going to be watching James walking around the distillery and throwing in some chat as he goes around. And we might as well get James in here as well. James, hey, there you are. How are you?
All right, Ross. Thank you. Hi, Kelsey. Hi, Ross. Hi, Australia. Good afternoon. It's morning here. Not quite crack at all, but reasonably early. Yeah, about to experience the Monday that you guys have just gone through. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got the whole thing ahead of you. But thanks for doing this for us this morning. We're looking forward to seeing around the distillery. It's looking like a nice day there in Dufftown. Is that a bit of cloud? I can't really tell.
Those kind of days, not nondescript, bit grey, could rain, might not. It's all right, that kind of weather.
Yeah, no, great, cool. And you're going to be, well, you're a distillery ambassador there, and you're now the master of live virtual tours.
Set up for a fall straight into the pond. Actually, we did loads of these. Of course, we haven't done one for about a month now. So I suddenly woke up this morning and thought, is the phone on charge? Is the gimbal on charge? Have I got the iPods plugged in? Have I got a permit? Anyway, yeah. Hopefully, we're good
here.
To go.
Yeah. We're here. We're ready to go. I'm looking forward to it. I'm just going to pretend I'm there with you, and I can see you're at the duck pond. It's the best place to start. And tell us a bit about where you are, James, at the moment.
Yeah, I will, Ross. What I'll do actually is I'll turn my camera around so you get a better view, because I'm going to be your cameraman. I'm the eyes of your group this morning. So just bear with me a second while I remember how I do this. I think 1, 2, 3. Wait, there we go. So you should now be getting a reasonable shot of 2 malt lorries tipping into the Balvenie. Let me give you a bit of a spin around. I know you've seen the film. Your guests will have seen the film, which is great, actually, isn't it? And it gives you all those lovely aerial views. But this is on the ground. So here's the duck pond or the dam, the Balvenie Dam. Some warehousing. That's a former manager's office, and that's now where we operate the visitor centre from. And we're very glad to say, just right now, again, fingers crossed, we've got visitors coming back, which is brilliant after nearly 18 months without any people on site. And then the distillery itself, we've got the maltings to the left, in the background warehouse 24, and then the distillery. And we're gonna have a good look around all of the site. And I guess, Ross, Kelsey, direct me where you'd like to go. Anything you're getting questions that need answering, and you need some visuals, then pitch in. I'll do my best to show you.
You lead the way, James, and also anyone watching, if you've got questions, throw them into the comments. I'm going to try and keep an eye on them. So if you've got questions, we'll try and answer as many as you can. I've got the first question, actually, James, before, well, actually, you can keep going. Are there any ducks in the pond there? That's quite important.
Yeah, no, we had a big seagull infestation for various reasons, and it sort of pushed the ducks to one side. We've dealt with them, not us personally, but people that know what to do with a seagull, and the ducks are back as the dominant species.
Good. That's good to hear.
On their eponymous name.
Actually, there was a bunch of seagulls causing havoc down at Glenfiddich as well. Was it the same bunch, just a gang of marauding seagulls going around terrorizing people?
Yeah, it was, Ross, and I attended a safety meeting that proudly proclaimed that they'd been shifted, and I thought, yeah, they've come down to us. So then they got shifted from us. I don't know where they are now. Perhaps they've gone to McAllen. have a look
We're
around there.
getting the important things out of the way first, anyway. While you're standing there, James, could you spin around and give us a view of that the malt lorry delivering there?
Yeah, so we've got a couple tipping this morning. We generally have around about 3 tips in a 24-hour period, and these have got about 28 tons of barley in the back. And of course, this is malted barley, as we know, Ross. And what comes into here, into the maltings, is unmalted barley, because we do a little bit of malting for ourselves. And this is what I'm taking your guests into here, the traditional floor maltings.
This is one of the things absolute favourite spot. I love you just seen that. It gives me chills looking at that. It's my favourite spot in the whole distillery.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we very much like to tell our guests, and online or on site, is that of the 50 odd distilleries across Speyside, we're the only operational floor maltings. Although right at the minute we're not operational either, as you can see. There's no barley down here. So it's a very simple explanation. We are having the electricians in to rewire the barley loft up here, which I'm going to show you next. So they have to halt process while we put some new wiring in, and that's to stop the place from blowing up. So it's reasonably important.
Quite important, yeah.
Quite important, yeah. Quite important. But here we go. Here's the barley loft, and all of this is raw barley, unmalted barley, waiting for its turn to go down onto the floor and to germinate.
Wow, great. It's like it's almost like sand dunes. I always just want to jump in. Kelsey, have you ever jumped in the barley?
Confession time.
Yeah, I've tried to on many an occasion, but never made it yet.
We're not really allowed to. Obviously, it's never happened ever.
No. But you hear about these things, don't you? You hear about these things, Ross.
Yeah.
Here we go. Some lovely unmalted barley, waiting to be steeped in spring water, woken up, and then it will grow and germinate and do what we need it to do to be able to mash it and get those nice sugars out of the barley. We're looking at Brian coming this way. Brian is a maltman. He's the only one on site right now, because the other guys have been sent to other parts of the distillery to help out. So
briskly walking to get out of shot there. He knows what's going on.
Well, it kind of, yeah. He's Mr. Wheelbarrow at the minute. He spends his days wheelbarrowing barley around the place. But he's still hanging around. Yeah. So because of the way that this works, I'm getting sound through the ear pods. So unless Brian whispers sweet nothings in my ear, we can't hear what he's got to say. So he can say anything he likes right now, and we won't be able to hear him.
Tell hello from Australia, from everyone in Australia, the whole lot.
Yeah, he said the whole entire continent of Australia says hello, Brian, and Brian says hello back. Right, should we have a quick chat about what's happening here, or lack of what's happening, perhaps? Yeah. Okay. Steep tanks. This is the start of the process of malting barley. Put the barley into here, steep it in spring water, which is, of course, the lovely fresh stuff that's coming off the hills that we also make whiskey with, but we also use it to steep the barley. This is an 8-ton steep tank, cast iron. Barley into here, a couple of days of steeping. If we could tune into Brian would tell us you can't just stick water into barley and let it steep. It'll drown. It'll develop sort of unpleasant kind of characteristics. You need to drop the water out a couple of times and let it have a break. Put fresh water in, what we call air breaks or dry breaks, and it fits, roughly speaking, about 12 hours wet, 12 hours dry, 12 wet, 12 dry, and then a final soaking. And then we dump it downstairs. Drop the steep. That's Brian's favourite job. Gets his wellies on. And jumps in there with his shovel and gets all
shovel it down the hole. I've actually done that job myself as well. It's not the most enjoyable job shoveling that down there. James, we've actually got a question there, which I was going to ask you there. Variety of barley, is it still Concerto? I saw the little sign in there.
Yeah, it is. That is the dominant strain that's still being used. Laureate, Sachet, we've been using this year as well, but mostly Concerto. With our own farm, that gives us the opportunity to be a bit more experimental. Generally speaking, if there's a dominant sort of strain that's got good yields in it, good sort of kind of protective nets, it's not going to get diseases through the winter and through the spring and things like that, then that's what the farmers will grow, because it's going to be successful. So basically, if you want to buy some barley at the minute, you're going to get a load of Concerto. But we can be a bit more experimental up on the mains of Balvenie farm. We've got a few fields up in the hills here, and we can try some different strains. And of course, we're getting quite close to harvest. Sort of September time is about the time for harvesting the spring sown barley.
Right. So is there any other strains being grown at Balvenie farm at the moment? Do you know?
Well, no, I don't know actually. We tend to find out a little bit later on once it gets worked with. I do know, if you want something off the record, I mean, and Kelsey's with us, and she'll know much better than me what the plans are. But I do know that they were going to do a little bit of moss burning as an experiment in the kiln, not peat or purple heather, but some moss. But that happened to coincide with the need to rewire the place. So I don't know if that's been put on hold. I don't know what happens to moss if you keep it. Does it grow a bit more? I don't know. But that might have been.
I suppose it doesn't go off.
No, true enough.
Do you have any? Can you tell us any more? Is it under wraps? I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Kelsey. Lost you. Oh, frozen.
That'll be something like the story of the Rolling Stone, when we bring that one out, won't it? It's a slightly surreal joke that for a Monday morning or even afternoon. I'd have thought.
I think we were about to get the scoop on a new Balvenie there, but Kelsey's frozen, so we're not getting it. She's been taken out by a hitman before she coughed up the internet's been cut off before the secret came out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what we're not seeing here, Ross, that you'll have been familiar with when you visited, is floors of barley growing. And as barley grows, it sort of starches begin to break down, which is what we want to be able to do so that we can extract sugar when we do the mash. So it's a question of growing barley long enough, generally about 6 days, to get the seed into a condition where we can actually then extract the sugars from it. And once it's grown enough, we've got to dry it out. So it gets swept down into this auger here, and then it goes into the elevator, and it pops upstairs into the kiln. And what I'll do is I'll take you up and we'll have a look in there if you like, because it's not lit, unfortunately. So we can go stand in it.
Do we have some new equipment in the kiln since I've been there? I think, don't we?
Yeah, that came as a bit of a surprise, actually. Yeah, just I went in there doing one of these virtuals one evening, and all of a sudden there was signs of building work. And we've got a turner. The one of the sort of hardest jobs that the maltman faces is the barley has to be thrown to aerate it when it's growing, and it also has to be thrown when it's drying as well, so that you get even growth and then you get even drying. So here we are. We're stepping inside the kiln just now. And this was probably the least pleasant activity for a maltman, because they've got to be in here. It's hot, it's steamy, it can be a bit smoky if we're burning a little bit of peat as well. And they had to be in here, masks for the old-fashioned reasons, and throw the barley. So the family installed this here. Now, like yourself, Ross, I like to kind of do a bit of research and check out what's going on in the business. And I read that Martin installed one of these in the 1950s. So 70 years later, we are now on it, the white heat of technology, and we've got one ourselves. So this is pretty good. This is good going. So this thing here lumbers along, and it throws the barley. I mean, it's kind of one of those kind of things. It's a simple idea, but it does not take some bulky kit to kind of.
Yeah, it is quite big. That is amazing. It's like 70 years after Martin got it.
Well, it was a bit of a cutting edge distillery, but even so, I think we've been a bit.
It's amazing for them having it at that point as well. That's
right,
It looks good though. It's looking great.
Yeah. It's hefty engineering. It had to be bolted into the side of these old bricks, and this kiln was built in the 1920s. It's the second kiln that we've had at Balvenie. So once they started drilling into these walls, it didn't like it, so they had to then reinforce the walls. It's one of those kind of things, if something's old and you start to take it apart, it then becomes a little bit ongoing, because other stuff starts falling off as well. And that's kind of what's happened with this. We're putting this in and then getting the big engines in to power this. Now the electrics have got to be upgraded to make sure that they're dust-proof, explosion safe as well. So yeah, we've got to spend a little bit of money on the place to keep it going, but it's important to do so, because this is, this sets us apart a little bit from our friends and competitors up here, because we actually have got our traditional. Just so your guys know where we're at with this. This is the way that barley used to be malted, and every distillery would have had one of these. A floor malting's a kiln, and really from the 50s, the 60s onwards, these started to be closed, and distilleries would turn to professional maltsters, much bigger operations, to buy their malted barley. And the two trucks you can see outside, and they'll have come from the coast, Arbroath, maybe Inverness, Buckie, Port Gordon, these kind of places around by us here, where there are big industrial maltings where they malt barley in a much more sort of controlled and regulated fashion than how we'll do it in here. But thankfully, family members back in the day in the 60s decided that we would keep our maltings, and we've stuck with it ever since. It's a great thing, because it's become iconic, really, of what Balvenie do.
It's such a special spot, and I'm sure I've told a lot of the people that be on this I've met before. I always tell people it's the first place I go in the distillery. Every time I'm visiting the distillery, whether I get there late at night or whatever. Actually, I'm probably not allowed in at night. When I get there in the morning, I'll always go straight to the malting floor and just go in and stand there. It's like all those grains of barley that we saw, sitting out there in the malting loft. Like, they all go through this process, and there's could be, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of little grains or millions. Each one of them ends up being a bottle of whiskey somewhere around the world. It's quite amazing looking at all those little grains.
Yeah, it is. I'm totally with you on that, Ross. It does immediately tell you that making whiskey is a pretty hands-on, craft-based activity, and the fact we do the maltings puts us straight in the center of that. I always like to kind of, with these films, just kind of point out that you can see these pagodas across Speyside and at different parts on the coast of Scotland, where the kilns, where the maltings used to be. You rarely get the chance to stand inside a working one. So there you go. That's the top of the pagoda, the Doig ventilator, to give it its technical term, that we're seeing. But of course, normally there's a lot of dry or smoky heat coming up through this grate, drying the barley for us. And I should perhaps explain, if just your guests looking at this and thinking, what the hell's that sat there for? This actually distributes the barley once it comes up from the elevator. But this thing then is wheeled out and sits outside while the barley is drying. And what I'll do next, actually, Ross, is I'll take you back downstairs, and we'll go and have a look at the furnace, so you can see how this all will operate.
Brilliant. You can get a look at that barley from up above as well. It's always a nice little view coming down to that.
But you see these sort of rubber bands and these, these kind of like this kind of old belt and braces sort of technology in here. That a lot of this is really much unchanged since the 1920s, when this would have been, modern technology when it was built. It was our second maltings. It was a big upgrade on what we had before. And to be actually doing that in the late 1920s was a bit of a what I call a punt, a bit of a kind of a gamble, because whiskey was really going through a sort of difficult time back then with US prohibition and other things. So the company actually went out on a bit of a limb to build this back in those difficult times. But it's been here and working and sort of paying back ever since.
Yeah.
So here we go. Down into the depths.
And here we go.
Yeah. So here we go. So here's the furnace. As you can see, we're taking the opportunity, while the maltings isn't operational, to repoint the bricks and just, if you get a chance to do a bit of deep maintenance on the maltings, then we're going to take it. So you can see there's the furnace, there's the flue for regulating the temperature, and then here is our second furnace, and this is where we sort of burn the interesting stuff from a flavor. The main furnace is about drying. That's going to be smokeless coal. And this furnace is about flavor, generally a little bit of peat, but of course we've done things like purple heather. We were just having a conversation about moss. We've burnt in there sort of casks as well, so burn through some American oak. Just sort of, I think in the 21st century, this is what the maltings means to us, more than being about production. Because it is undoubtedly cheaper for us to just go and buy barley that's already been malted. But this really gives us an opportunity, partly to be still authentic and have this process, but also to run interesting experiments. 20 years ago, we started running or rediscovering, if you like, experiments with peat, because we wouldn't have burnt peat for quite a long time. And now we've got the week of peat, and peat week in its various kind of forms. These were experiments that became a normal normal part of production. The purple heather, for edge of burnhead wood. That's a kind of experiment of 20 odd years ago as well. That's become not normal production, but is now at least out there on the market.
Yeah, and it's amazing to have that ability. And I was just going to ask Kelsey actually. Well, while we're wandering through to the next spot, Kelsey, from your perspective, Kelsey, like having our own malting floor, how does that affect what you're doing? You're creating the flavor and the whiskey. You're looking at those things. Having our own malting floor and being one of the only places with it, how does that work for you?
For us, it's definitely so much more than the spirit that we want to create. We always want it to be consistent and to have the highest quality. But for us to be able to have a craft that we pass down from generation to generation, it's just amazing. And the fact that we have the ability and the family want to keep that tradition alive, it's just amazing. And the fact that we can do this is, as James was saying, it's so unique. So we are extremely lucky.
Yeah. And actually, when you got cut off earlier on, I don't know if that was good timing when I just asked about if there were any other, little experiments. Do you know anything about any other experiments happening in there?
So in the maltings, I know that James had mentioned that we were looking at one in particular, but we definitely have a few up our sleeves at the moment. Like we were saying, because we keep this craft alive, we want to be able to do new and exciting things, and innovating and being able to push and pull these different levers to create different flavours in our new make spirit is something that we're incredibly proud of. So James had mentioned one earlier, but we definitely have a few more things that we hope we'll be able to release. And it's obviously amazing in the position that I'm in to think that we'll not release any of these spirits until 10, 12, 50 years time. So I hope that I'm around for some of these launches as well.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, it's going to be a while. It's the very first part of the process, really, that malting is happening. Are so close to the beginning, so it's a long way away from us drinking it. It's exciting that we're doing that stuff, though. Really
Absolutely.
Exciting. James, where are you now?
Okay, so Ross, I've come into the mash house. This is a 1970s makeover, rebuild, so it's quite functional. But I guess in that ensuing sort of 50 years or 40 odd years, it's become has a sort of a kind of historic value of its own as well. This is sort of it's not pretty. This is traditional whiskey making from the kind of era when we were bashing out whiskey for blending purposes. So we kind of can show you the traditional floor maltings, and then we can show you whiskey making from the sort of 70s era as well. This is a full lighter mash tun. It's bubbling away with a mixture of grist, it's milled barley, and heated spring water that's warm to the touch. And this process extracts the sugars from the barley that the malting process has allowed us to get to, if you wish. What we're looking to do in here is extract just over 50,000 litres of sugary barley-infused spring water, which we give the name wort to. And to get 50-odd thousand litres, we have to put about 100,000 litres in. Different temperatures, partly because some of it sticks in the barley, but also because, really for efficiency's sake, we run a big dump of water, a slightly lesser dump of water, at different temperatures to extract or convert starches into sugars. So I've been slightly put off by the alarm here and hoping it's not a fire.
Just so no one panics as well, James, can you tell us what the alarm is so that everyone knows there's nothing going wrong?
Yeah, I'm hoping it's not the fire alarm. It's stopped now, and it wasn't quite loud enough for the fire alarm, so I think we're okay. Yeah, we put water in at 65, 70, 75, and 85 degrees, and this is really about opening up starches so that we can get access to them, convert them into sugars, and around about half of the water that goes into here, particularly the higher temperature water, gets sped back into the tanks and is used again. So we're looking to get just over 50,000 litres of this sweet water that we call wort out of the mash tun. And then the next job is to cool it. So it runs through a cooler. So these tanks here have got the heated spring water in. This is the cooler, which cools the wort down again so that we can put yeast into the mix and get those sugars converted into alcohol. So we'll start the process of making beer, really, don't we? Or, a fairly basic, strong distiller's beer.
Yeah.
It's worth maybe saying, Ross, that the waste barley, because we're now dealing with liquids, not solids, the solids that are left over will go to our anaerobic digester on site that's there for all 3 distilleries that we have here. And that will be converted into methane. And that methane is going to give us the steam to heat everything up in the distilleries, but also now it will start in the process of powering our lorries with that gas. So it really is a good recycling green sort of process that we're setting in train here. The barley had to be milled, and this is the milling process. This is a distoner, which shakes the barley a little bit to make sure it's not got any bits and pieces in it. Only passes down the barley, and right down the bottom is that little red blob down there is what's called Fortius mill, which actually survived the entire makeover. That was here before the rebuild of the distillery. They left the mill down there and rebuilt the distillery all around it. And there it is, still working away. This here is a big bin full of barley, and this is the original wall of Balvenie's first kiln, which was built in 1892 and was operational in 1893, and that's when Balvenie kicked into life.
It's been there since the beginning.
Been there since the beginning. Okay, some beer.
And the one thing that we don't get in this, James, when you're walking through, another thing that I love, I mean, I'm sure Kelsey would be the same, it's the smells when you're walking through these different bits from the malting floor, through the mash and into here. It's the smell that changes. I love that. I can almost imagine it when you're walking through.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's quite noisy. I mean, maybe I apologize. I start to shout a little bit because I can hardly hear myself speak when I'm stood next to the mill. But yeah, there's some nice sweet sort of malt aromas in the mash house, and through to here, a sort of banana bread, banana and citrusy kind of beer. You can definitely know that there's some alcohol happening, or alcohol creation happening in here. Yeah, we've got these really lovely Oregon pine washbacks. They're huge. It's always a difficult one with the lighting in here to try and demonstrate how tall they are. But that goes right down to the floor, about 17 feet of height. Not sure what that is, about 5 or 6 meters in new money. And into here goes the wort. This one has just been cleaned out. I was slightly conscious. I'm just going to hold the phone a little bit more carefully. You can't really see, but that's an empty washback. If the lights adjust a little bit, that's plugged into here, waiting for the delivery of the wort and the yeast to start that fermentation process. And I can pick a few of these out and have a look at what's occurring inside. So we're making alcohol, but the yeast also creates flavors as well, isn't it? So we're going to get ourselves a big tank of 9%, maybe just shy of that, 9% ABV beer. Quite fruity. We have a 64, 65 hour fermentation time. About 48 hours, what you'll find is most of your alcohol creation is done, if not the whole lot. That extra little bit of time helps what we call the ester development, the fruity esters, which are sort of a consequence of what the yeast has already done in this big pot, and that helps to create a little bit of that sort of nice banana-y, slightly citricy, fruity. What I would describe as, we've all got. It's got a subjective activity, isn't it? Nosing and tasting. I think we're testing the fire alarm, so don't worry. Two hits just after 9 o'clock as a test. Yeah, a bit of warmth, a lot of carbon dioxide. The byproducts of fermentation.
I think, and those flavors that are being created in this first part of fermentation, that's quite a big. I always thought it was like it was explained to me once as like a kind of color palette that a painter would use. Kind of the same for you, Kelsey. The flavors that are created in this part that then go on to be distilled and go into barrel. That's quite a big part for you, or how would you describe it?
Oh, it absolutely is. So anything that we're looking to capture during distillation has to be built in this stage. So it's really important for us, as James was saying, that we get all of that alcohol conversion because we want as much spirit as possible. But then the tail end of fermentation, where we want to build up our acids to then make our esters, is so important for us. And then we can use those base products, like you're calling it, the color palette, if you like. We can use those base compounds, and then during distillation, through our cut points, we can hone in on specific flavours so that we can create that beautiful sweet cereal and new make Balvenie flavour that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an important part of the process. I can like almost smell this, like opening those doors there. I can kind of get that like sourness to it. We just got another question from Lisa from Archie Rose Distillery. How many washbacks would be filled by the wort from one of the lauter tons?
So yeah, it's designed to match up. So that 53,000 liters of wort goes into one of these. So
right,
it's a batch process. It takes about 5 hours. A lot of the work is done quite early in that time. First couple of hours, most of the liquid will be loaded into here. But in total, it will take 5 hours for the washback to go through for the mash tun to go through its cycle. But yeah, that one mash will load one washback, but then it gets broken down into smaller quantities for the distillation process. You can see this one here a little bit more clearly. If you see the movement in the liquid, that's it fermenting. That's the energy release of yeast consuming sugars, converting them into alcohols, and it's also creating some gas and some heat and some flavor congeners as well. It's an amazing product. That sounds a bit sort of strange, but I could sit and watch yeast work all day.
Just watching the bubbles there as well, you can see them. You see them quite clearly. Yeah, I totally understand. You can just sit and watch that.
Definitely hypnotising.
It is kind of hypnotising. Well, the three of us are just sitting watching it. Everyone at home is like, "What are you guys doing?"
Okay, yeah, get another drink going. So there we go. A lot of Oregon pine washbacks for creating a big pot of beer, and I think I mentioned it's about 65 hours for fermentation time, and then it goes off to a big holding tank outside, and then it's ready to, as Kelsey was saying, to distill it, to refine it, to get the flavor profile out of that big bucket of different alcohols and different flavor congeners that we've created within the wood there. Now we're gonna head for the still house, which is sort of we're still trying to work out how to make this a little bit more interesting for guests. But Cameron's helped by just coming the other way, look, and being more interesting than anything else that's happening. Thank you. So Cameron's a mashman today, and he's on the morning shift.
Great.
So we're going to head downstairs, see a few of our colleagues, past, present, and future, just over there.
Team photos up there.
Yeah, team photo. And down into the depths and into the still house. So yeah, we could do with a mural or something to keep our guests entertained. I always like to focus on here to add to the tension. As we,
an explosive atmosphere.
Explosive, and we're not talking in metaphors here, Rob.
Well, we try and create that in our events, an explosive atmosphere, but not literally.
Yeah. Not literally. Now, this is what one of the, to try and kind of give you the vicarious experience. What hits you when you come through the door here is heat. It's immensely warm. You remember that from your times coming here. Well, I guess it's immensely warm for us who live in the hardy north of Scotland anyway. We get temperatures in here of around about 40 odd degrees, which we don't experience ever in normal life up here. It can be very, very warm. But this is where half the magic takes place. The other half of the magic takes place the other side of this wall, where there are 5 stills very, very similar to these, but they will do the first distillation, the wash distillation, and then these are the spirit stills, and they'll do the second. And if I could just focus a little bit on the shape of these stills, because this is what gets us all excited, isn't it? It's what kind of stills are you using? And over the years, we've gradually came to, by accident and design, focus upon these just over 12,000 litre ball boil stills as our preferred shape, both for wash and spirit. You see onion shapes, you see the lantern shapes, variations on a theme, the way that the lye pipes fits, how long you spend over this, all of these things, Kelsey will tell us, shape the kind of spirit that you're trying to make. But once you've got this engine going the way that you you want it to work, you tend to run it to the regime that creates the consistency in the spirit character that you're looking for. And Kelsey mentioned that sort of sweetness, that malt note that we look for in Balvenie new make spirit. And my kind of understanding is that these ball boils, reflux rolls, help to increase copper contact, to leave the vapors sat on the copper, which helps to extract heavier notes, sulfury notes that will kind of mask the nice flavors that we're looking for. Perhaps helps to kind of agitate the vapors, which helps it to pull more flavor through. Basically, you know, if we take our time over this part of the process and let the vapors sit on the copper, what comes through is a nice, clean, flavoursome spirit that will be nice and sweet, element of fruitiness to it, lots of malt, and that will mature into a really nice Balvenie. Shall I briefly run through the stats for you on how this works?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'm still mesmerised. It's when you get to the copper as well, like that, just that shiny copper colour. They look so beautiful. Just mesmerised. I suppose we're mesmerised by every part as we're going through. We keep saying this, but yeah, here's with the stats. Go for it.
Okay, so a double distillation. The first distillation is around about 5.5 hours, 12,000 litres of beer. Boil it up, boiling off the alcohols and pulling the flavours across. No selection is done in that first distillation. It's about getting the alcohols across, leaving behind some water, and the end result is we pull off about 4,000 litres of what we call low wines. And I can show you some low wines because they're just coming through the low wines receiver here. So it looks enough. It looks like water, but if you drank it, it's not water. It's low strength, impure, not hugely pleasant alcohols, and it comes out at about 45% ABV. Will eventually calm down we'll get all the way down to about 0.5% ABV, at which point we'll stop doing this process, and the whole mix will be 4,000 litres at about 25% ABV. Low wines. And then what we do is we mix it with just over 7,000 litres of faints from the previous go, and then in here we do a second distillation, which is about 11 hours. What David is doing here at the minute is introducing steam to these indirect steam heated stills and heating them up, introducing the steam, heating them up. It's pretty hands-on, the still house here at Balvenie.
Yeah,
and then the second distillation. That's right, yeah. And then the second distillation, this is where, when Kelsey talked about selection, this is what David is doing here. It's about the cut. As that alcohol flows out in the second distillation, it's going to go through various stages. It's very strong. Gradually more water comes through. Some of it at the outer edges is undrinkable, but as we get to the middle of the flow, the heart, as we know, that's where we can extract the drinkable spirit. But the cut points mean that we can select the particular characteristics that we're looking for. So an important part of David's job will be to cut it between 74% ABV and 64. And in that kind of little window of spirit, which will only amount to about, in total, 900 litres of the overall 12,000, that will be the heart of the flow. And you can see some heart, actually. I remember now, I can go down here, can't I? Yes, it's okay. I can't take guests down, but I can take myself down. I've got a work permit and a gas meter.
Yeah, let's get down and have a look at the spirits. They're so beautiful as well, all that.
Yeah, so there's low wines pouring out, no cut, just into that tank until we've extracted all the alcohol. But over here, you can see that we can select where the spirit flows. It can be on 4 shots or faints, or it can be on heart flow into the main collector that you can see just there. And these, so spirit stills number 1 and 2 are on heart at the minute. So that is new make spirit destined to go into casks to mature into Balvenie. Yeah. Of course, it all looks pretty much the same. An old distiller's trick would be to take a sample of that and stick some fresh water in, and if it stays crystal clear, then you've got yourself drinkable spirit. It doesn't kind of allow you to be very scientific about it, but it does at least know that you've got the drinkable stuff. So back in the day, before hydrometers were available, and we're talking a couple of 100 years ago, that's what a distiller would do: cut it with water, which is why we call it making the cut. If it goes a funny blue color, you're looking at something that's going to turn you a funny blue color as well, and pretty quickly as well. First thing to go will be your eyesight. That's why it's called. That's why it's called cleric. Yeah, that's why we call it cleric. because it's clear. So that's running faint. So you can see that really cloudy, impure, lower strength alcohols pouring through there. But the spirit flow is crystal clear, nice and sweet. That'll be sweet, malty.
Even through the camera, you can see that. You can see how clear that is compared to the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, back in the day, before we got into the business of putting spirit into casks, that's what a Highland Scot would have called whiskey, Ushkabar, cleric, whatever you want to call it. That's what they were drinking. They didn't stick it into wood. It was good to go. We're a bit more gentle with the spirit these days. What you can see here, Ross, is where the furnaces used to be when these were directly fired stills, coal-fired furnaces underneath to heat the bottom of the pan. What's going in there now is steam, and that steam is coming from the boiler house, which is powered by the methane that is coming from the draft and the leftover liquids from here as well. So it's a nice loop of recycled energy being used.
That was one of the questions just coming from Lisa again, like what happens with the pot ale and spent lees. But that's all going into the anaerobic digester as well, is that right? It all goes in there, doesn't it?
The pot ale does, Ross. Yeah, the spent lees actually goes to riverbeds here that will extract the excess copper from it until it's back down to the purity of the spring water, and then it goes back into the river. So the spent lees is the one thing that doesn't get recycled as such, but it does get a natural cleaning up process through beds that are on site. So it's just done, it's done naturally. So the one thing we've not seen is how vapor, we're heating our alcohols in here and they're vaporizing and going up this beautiful still. Why do they come back into the distillery as liquid? Well, that brings us back to the ducts and the condensers. So these condensers will have cold water from the river dam, and that dam itself is actually excess spring water. So what we've not used to malt or make the whiskey with, collected in the dam before it goes off to the river, pump it through these condensers inside copper pipes, and then the vapors can run along the outside of the copper pipes, and they'll chill, hit that cold copper, and then they come back into the spirit safe as liquid. So that brings the ducts and the importance of the ducts, because they can tell us something about the temperature of the cooling water. If they're not sat on it, it's too cold.
Yeah, so they get some warm water there occasionally.
They get some warm water just as a little treat for
a little Speyside jacuzzi for the ducks.
The tireless work that they do on our behalf. Yeah.
When we're looking at the spirit coming off there, and you're looking at the cut, and just it's quite amazing watching it all pour into the bowl there. I'm always saying that's like the initial ingredient that you're getting, Kelsey, too. That's what you've got is your thing to put in the barrels, and then you're watching that. It's kind of like the starting point for the whiskey, really, at that point.
Oh, absolutely. And so James described the whole process fantastically, and he's absolutely right. When we're talking about reflux, I can hear your meter, James.
Yeah, I just muted him for a second.
I know. So James had described it perfectly when he was talking about reflux as well, and especially in Balvenie, we know that we have a beautifully rich Speyside spirit. If we compare it to something like Glenfiddich, the amount of reflux that we get in the still will determine how heavy the spirit can be. Obviously, more reflux, we have those compounds falling back into the still, and then it's a harder effort, if you like, for them to be carried over into the line arm for us to collect as the final spirit. So it really is an amazing process, and the way that James is describing it, that sweet cereal flavour that we're looking for, is so important for us when we are maturing the spirit out. We know we have good quality barrels, so we want to make sure that the spirit is absolutely perfect. When it comes up to bottling or we're doing cask finishing, we put a massive amount of effort into sampling each and every cask to make sure that it's perfect. But obviously we want the spirit to sleep in the warehouse, for example, if it's double wood, for at least 12 years. And so we want to know at that point, good quality spirit into good quality casks, and we'll allow it to do its thing in there.
Yeah, and then you keep an eye on it and make sure it's doing its thing.
Absolutely.
James, where are you now?
So I'm stood outside the oldest part of the distillery. I think Glentorrick claims to be the oldest working distillery, and they're looking at a 1786, I think. date on that. Well, this building's older than that. We might possibly have the oldest building, but it predates us, and it wasn't a distillery. It was an old mansion house built in the 1720s. We built actually the original Balvenie into here, at least the maltings and our grain store and first warehouse, and it's always been a maltings. It's actually made of stone. I like telling this story because it kind of it makes Balvenie even older. It's built out of stones that were part of the ruin of Balvenie Castle. So these were first shaped up probably in the 14th century to build Balvenie Castle, and then they were used here to build New Balvenie Castle because this was the local landowner, the local laird, the Duffs. William Duff of Bracco, to give him his full title. If anyone's ever of something, you know they must be important and have nicked the land off somebody else a few years ago. And when we came to build the new maltings, we actually kind of did what William Duff of Bracco had done. We borrowed some old stones, so we took the stones from here and used them to build the new maltings. So our maltings here is built out of Balvenie Castle, so it gives it a lovely long heritage, and gives us every right to call the place Balvenie, doesn't it?
That's right, incredible. I was thinking actually maybe later in the year for a different live, maybe even including Balvenie Castle in it if we can. It's a bit of a stretch from the distillery, but if you're up for going there, James, I think we should go there the next time or another time later in the year.
Yeah, it's a 10-15 minute walk up there. We can certainly do that. We did a bit of filming not long ago with me stood outside the castle talking about how it wasn't Balvenie Distillery, which was kind of interesting. There is quite a bit of it still there. It's a ruin, but it belongs to historic Scotland, and it can be visited.
It's definitely missing a few. It's missing a few bits, but we know where those bits are, and they're going to better use. Right, they're making whiskey rather than being a castle. I think it's there.
Yeah, well, that actually was a little bit of a stink back in the 1890s when news spread that this young upstart, wasn't that young, was he? William Grant is in his 50s. Let's say 50s is young. Yeah, let's go for that one. This youngish upstart William Grant was going to build another distillery. You know, he'd already built one. What's the matter with him? And he was going to build it out of Balvenie Castle. And so, sacrilege. And then, no, sorry, we're going to build it out of New Balvenie Castle, which is a derelict, and none of you have noticed it for the last 100 years anyway. So, stop complaining was the message. Right, we're going in. We're going in. Yeah. So another one of those, let me try and give you the vicarious experience. It goes a wee bit colder, a bit damper, stepping into a dunnage warehouse. But there's this lovely mixture of whiskey and oak and an amazing aroma, which when people physically come to visit us, they start off the tour with raw barley and they have those nice aromas, and we finish off in here. Of course, we'd have been to the cooperage, but we're going to do that for your visitors next week, or your guests next week.
Yeah, we'll get the cooperage next week.
Yep. So they come in here and get these lovely aromas. We give them a wee bit of a drink, and everything starts to roll and fit into place from that point onwards. But here we are. So this is warehouse 24, which is not obviously modern warehousing. This isn't how the bulk of our stock will now be kept. We have got a fair few of these sort of Dunnage style warehouses, but they're a little bit impractical for shifting casks in and out. Through the windows here, I can kind of give you a sort of insight. That big building that you can just see out there is actually a warehouse, I think 30 something, I can't quite remember its name, might be 35. That'll have about 60,000 casks in racks. And I actually worked for the warehouse team a little bit during when we had our, I don't want to mention the word lockdown, but when we had our lockdown, and it's an incredible experience when you're given a sheet, probably by Kelsey maybe or David, you're given a cask or to remove, and it's like row 8, 14 along, and you've got to get up there, get all the casks out, shift that one out, put them all back again. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. I always think the big warehouses is like it's like that last scene in Indiana Jones where the Ark of the Covenant goes in. It's like all the boxes everywhere. It's like you can't even see the end of it. I asked if I could go in and get some samples just to help out the guys one time, and I think Kelsey, yourself, and David had asked for some Caribbean cask samples. They'd been in the rum barrels for I don't know 4 or 5 months at that point. So I went in and actually took the samples out from, I think it was like 12 or 24 different casks, it's just amazing walking around there. Obviously, I didn't taste any of those whiskies while I was in there. Straight out of the barrel.
Do you know, when you were working with them, James, I trust they had said that we'd selected the most accessible casks every time. We do our best, but even if we're looking for the one that's right in the middle of the bay, unfortunately we have to get it. So we always let everyone know we try our best, but it needs must.
Do you do that? Do you try and choose the ones that are easiest to get to, as well as obviously the flavour and everything too, but out of the whole lot?
Always, we'll always try and select where possible in the highest face. So that means they're the first in the bay. They're the easiest for everyone to get to. When we do cask finishing, everyone's quite strategic about how they put the casks away. So if we're finishing in port puncheons or rum barrels, like you mentioned for Caribbean cask, they'll put them into the front faces because they'll know that they're only going to sit there for between 4 and 6 months, and then we'll start tipping them for bottling. Exactly. But when James was showing us our new make spirit, when we fill that into casks, we can fill them in a palletised warehouse in face 1. So that means they're right at the very back of the warehouse because they're going to sit in there for at least 12 years. So when it comes time to start tipping them again, where we were filling from face 1 to face 10, we'll start selecting from face 10 to face 1 just to try and make it a little bit easier. But everyone loves to give us a little bit of a moan every now and then when they have to move them to get to face 5.
Choosing the ones at the back.
Yeah. Well, it's okay because my 2 weeks as a warehouseman, they said afterwards they were okay. You know, they could live without me. Now these guys here would be easy to get to. So this is 2020 distillate, in, as you can see, in American oak casks. They'd be pretty easy to get to. What the thing is, it's not very easy to get to this warehouse full stop for the team. So what they do, of course, focus on here is that some of the older casks you see, and I've been sort of showing up some from the 60s, some sherry puncheons from the 1970s. But this here gains you access to ton 1509. So quite a lot of what's happening in here is David and Kelsey bringing together the liquids for our once a year output. And actually,
that's above the ton there.
Yeah, batch 8 is sat, I believe, in these casks. It certainly was until recently. In fact, yeah, I can see from the label. So batch 8 is now out of the ton and is sat here. So it's getting ready to go.
So these are the empty barrels that have just been emptied into ton 1509 that's made batch 8?
No, they're actually, that is what was here previously. But what happens is, I think, Kelsey might be able to explain why, is when the ton's done its work and has married the whiskey together, that it gets a sort of, for storage purposes, it gets put into these slightly tired oak casks that will store it safely, but won't carry on the maturation so much. Right. And then in there now, if we were to look inside ton 59, should be a big 8,000 litres of double wood, keeping the wood nice and soft.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So once it's sat in the ton and we allow the spirit to marry together, we then take it back out and we'll put it into refill wood. We know the flavour is just going to be locked in at that point. And as James said, it's just a lot easier when it comes to bottling. So we're able to pull off the casks, send them up to bottling. And as we had said, we put wetting liquid in there, and that's just to make sure that the ton doesn't dry out, so that when it comes to our next batch, we can put it in there and we're not worried about leaks or having any issues with the ton. And I just want to say as well, I see that Damien's asked a question here, is there basically a change between using a rack warehouse as opposed to a dunnage warehouse? We've carried out lots of different trials in terms of where we place the casks in a warehouse, temperature differential in the warehouse, and obviously we know if we have a more humid environment, a hotter environment, we're more likely to have maturation losses. But within a warehouse, that's not something that we've picked up in terms of rack versus dunnage on the same location. But we do lots of different trials. We have distilleries in the lowlands in Scotland, and so we are doing lots of different trials around how are our maturation losses different and what can we do to minimise these. You'll appreciate in Dufftown we've got over 1 million casks on site, so if we are having greater maturation losses, we want to minimise those where we can as well, and keep enough spirit so that we can send it out to everyone in knowledge when we can.
Yeah, everyone's always wanting more. Wow, it's looking good. And I know I've said this in every part, but there's there's a real feeling when you see you walk around there, like in the warehouses. For me, it's that that almost the dirt from the ground and the wood and the little bit of spirit that's in the air, and that slight change in temperature, a little bit cooler. I can almost feel it looking at it now. I can smell that kind of musty, beautiful old whiskey and dirt. I've explained this to people before, and it doesn't sound nice. I mean, old whiskey, old wood and dirt doesn't sound great, but when you smell it when you're in that warehouse, I mean, James, you're smelling it. I don't know if you'd describe it as the same as that, but I think it's
you're right. It's it's a little sort of foggy, but in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a sort of sweet, moisture, I suppose, in the air, and also the floors in here. They used to kind of help to create that dampness or trap it in by putting cinders in here from the still house. So I think that's also quite a nice link with the kind of the physical work that would have taken place, much more physical work in the past, when they had to stoke furnaces to heat the stills, and then those used embers would get put in here, of course, once they cool down, to help hold in the dampness. So we're walking on the hard labors of the guys back in the 1950s and further back.
Wow.
Which and we got some 1965. I find this kind of like quite fascinating aspect of just whiskey making in general, that here you've got a couple of casks that, what we're looking at now, 50, 55, 56 years ago, they were distilled, put next to one another, 7131, 7130, all their friends and relatives and have been used, probably some of them pretty sharpishly, back when it was all going for blending. By the early 70s, there wouldn't have been that much of it left. And here we go. There's just these two have survived and have sat here and have gone from being, considered something for blending to something. I doubt we'd be popping this into a blend any day.
Have you had a little taste out of there, James? When
no one's around. No, I haven't tried. I want to put on record that I haven't tried the 65. And if there's not so much left anymore, that is the Angels and not me and Charlie Metcalf. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, we'll take your word for it. I mean, I know you guys like a whiskey occasionally, so
straight from the wood. The 67, on the other hand, we've had this. Yeah, we finished this one off. It was quite nice. Yeah.
It's so incredible to see those old whiskies in there sitting in the barrels. They've sat in that warehouse, potentially that whole time while the whole world's just spun around it and all sorts of things have happened, and it's just sat there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've sort of been to the moon and back. We've had the Beatles.
Yeah.
Some other things. And here we are. That's right. So much has happened since these were.
It must be quite cool for you, Kelsey, like when you're seeing the samples come in, of like new releases, of older releases, and ones that are coming out soon that are quite old. It must be quite amazing looking at those that have been put down so long ago.
Oh, it definitely is. And David and I always say that what an incredibly lucky position that we are to be able to set up the blend for Balvenie 50 and sampling all these casks that are at least 50 years old. Obviously, before my time, David would have worked at the distillery at that point when they were just filling them as new make, but the amount of hands that have touched the casks and the amount of people that have worked on the casks, or they worked in the mash house or in the still house to make sure that spirit was absolutely perfect. And then we have the lucky job of going in and sampling the casks and putting the final product, the blend, together. It is amazing. And I love the thought of the spirit that we're looking at, the spirit that James walks by every day, the spirit that we see for quality. A lot of that will sit in casks for 12, 14, 21, whatever product we're making, but there will certainly be a few lucky ones that don't get tipped, and they'll mature on and become 50-year-old one day or even older. So it is amazing. I love the thought of all of these little time capsules sitting maturing away.
Yeah, they are a little time capsule. And like you said, there's so many people that have made these, and all from different times and different years, and the different people that have worked at the distillery have all had a hand in whether it was growing the barley or malting the barley, tending the stills, building those barrels. Like there's all these hands that have gone into making all that care and love. It's incredible. It's amazing. Oh, I wish I was there, James. You've got me emotional.
Sorry. I was going to ask if you wanted to check on your cask. Do you want me to make sure it's okay?
But
while we're here.
Yeah, I mean, I know you'd be looking after it.
Don't worry. We've not been sampling from it. No, only at the weekend. Right. So we're up here somewhere, aren't we? Which one is yours?
I was sharing one with Sam. I actually haven't taken anything out of it yet, and that's been about 5 years, almost 5 years.
Looking for the fullest.
I'll need to check.
Well, it's probably one of these, because I know that they're all early 90s, aren't they? That you guys have picked. I know one of these is Neil's as well, isn't it?
You know, I haven't even really mentioned to whoever might be watching at the moment. I haven't really told many people here that there is a little one that I've got for pulling some samples from. So thanks, James. Now they all know, and they're all going to be asking me for some.
Well, you know, 30 pound a bottle, see you around the back of the van, you know, that kind of thing. We've all got to make a living.
I'll have filled up a proper dog with it. We'll sell it in them.
Yeah. Just give us the nod.
Before we're getting towards, well, we're a little bit over time actually, but we'll start finishing up. But another question from Lisa for you, Kelsey. Have you tried a cask from when you were born?
So I have been very lucky to try a cask from when I was born, and it's actually a really, really lovely story. And part of the reason that I love Balvenie so much, apart from the fact that I'm the apprentice malt master, I'm a whiskey blender for all of our products, and Balvenie just is such a special part in everyone's heart, because we do things, over and above basically what's necessary, if you like. And when I was asked to be David's apprentice, Ross, I know you had mentioned it about the copper dog. So the copper dog is a little copper vessel that we've got. I actually don't have mine to hand, or I could have popped out to show everyone. When I was offered the position as David's apprentice, I was given my own copper dog. So it's a copper cylinder. And if James is able to go over, you can see we've got the bung holes in the casks. So what we would do before is we would zip our copper dog, our little copper cylinder, on a chain through the bung hole, and we would sample the casks. And so when I was offered this position, I was given my own copper dog, and the base had a penny from 1962 on the bottom, the year that David had started the distillery, and the spirit inside was distilled in the year I was born. So very lucky, and what an amazing gift to be given.
Wow, that is incredible. And having the coin on the bottom of the copper dog, I've heard about stories of those being made. They're so special, and that would have been Dennis or one of the other coppersmiths maybe that made that. It makes it even more special again.
It was by Dennis, so he was very proud, and I was over the moon to receive it. So I've been very lucky, Lisa.
That is amazing. James, have you had a whiskey from the year you were born?
No, I haven't. Unfortunately, as you get older, the whiskey from when you were born gets more expensive, doesn't it? To the point where, sadly, I'm looking at big numbers. So
you're in the right warehouse for it. There's bound to be one in there.
Yeah, there is. There absolutely is, and it's in my profile. I've got a picture of me next to it, and my profile picture actually for the company and for social media and stuff like that. Yeah, it's here. I've got my eye on it. So
you never know. You might get a little taste out of it after this, putting it out there.
Yeah.
I actually have a little sample bottle behind me. 1988 was the year I was born, and it was the first trip that I brought some bartenders from Australia. And I know there was a couple on here at the moment watching. It was my 30th birthday the week that I brought the 12 bartenders over. And I'd been with the company maybe a year and a half or 2 years. And I thought, since it was my 30th birthday, I didn't know if I could get a sample of a 1988 cask, but I sent David Stewart an email, and I just thought I'd chance it. Like, David, I don't suppose there's any chance of having a wee taste for my 30th birthday from an 88 cask. And he emailed back the next day, and he's like, yeah, of course, we'd love to do that for you. So he left one at the distillery for me, which I popped open with the bartenders. We were at the Highlander Inn. We popped open the bottle there and had a little taste, and I've still got a little bit of it behind me here. It's amazing stuff as well. I think it was a refill bourbon cask from 88. So it's just so bright and fruity and fresh. But yeah, it's very special to have stuff like that. We're very lucky.
So Kelsey, you can see the precedent there. If I email you on my birthday, you just pop a sample in the post, and there's a tradition for the company.
That seems to be the case.
I've given it away.
giving it away to undeserved.
Well, we'll probably wrap up there. I think, there's plenty of people watching in Australia at the moment. This is going to be available for everyone to watch during the week. This is the first of 2 at the moment. We might even do a couple more of these later in the year. So if everyone wants to join us next week, I think potentially all of us will be back next week with some other guests. We're going to be at the cooperage, and we're really just be focusing on the story of cask finishing. So David Stewart will be joining us as well, looking back to the 80s where cask finishing started. We've got Ian, our head cooper, who's going to be having a chat to us about the barrels at the cooperage. And we've got Anna Austin, who is our cask buyer, who buys all the barrels for all our whiskey. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. And there's around 1,000 sample packs of Balvenie tasters around the country for some of the bartenders out there to pick up. I'll be announcing the places that you can pick them up from, as long as COVID allows for that at the time and where you are. So there'll be bars you can pick up your sample packs from. It's first come, first serve. So get in there and get your samples, and you can join us next week at 6 o'clock, same time, and we'll be doing a little bit more of this. But yeah, finishing off, Kelsey and James, thank you so much. This has been awesome. It's so great to see you around the distillery. It's really just good seeing you guys and having a chat. Thank you very much.
No problem at all. Love it.
Yeah, it's great to spend some time with you and to bring a bit of entertainment to you guys over there. Yeah.
It's definitely been entertaining as well. Yeah, it's been great. And thank you so much. And all the knowledge and information from the two of you. Perfect. Thank you so much. And that pretty much wraps it up, I think. So for everyone watching in Australia, thank you very much for watching tonight. Cheers to you all. And we'll see you next week. So, Slàinte mhath. Cheers.
Slàinte mhath. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.